It's hard to pinpoint the exact moment when life flips. One minute you're going about your day, maybe a little bit distracted, thinking about dinner plans or the millions of things on your to-do list. And then, without warning, it happens. Something irreversible, something that doesn't even seem possible until you're right in the middle of it, watching it unfold and unable to stop it. That's what makes stories like Yulia Sharcombe's so devastating, because the tragedy didn't stem from some reckless decision or risky behavior. It happened in a moment of routine, a moment that a lot of parents have experienced countless times. Yulia was just 21 years old, a young woman, a wife, a mother. She lived in Belarus with her husband Artur and 2 daughters. She was someone who, by all accounts, loved her family fiercely. Her social media pages were filled with the kinds of photos that speak to a full life. Celebrations, tons of smiles, laughter, simple joy. At 21, she was still building the foundation of adulthood, navigating young motherhood, but from the outside looking in, it seemed like she was doing it all with grace and love. August 31st, 2019, Yulia's 21st birthday. She had plans to celebrate the day, and she was already surrounded by family at home. The day was warm and relatively uneventful, the kind of late summer afternoon that makes you forget that anything bad could ever happen. At some point during the party, Yulia excused herself from the festivities and went to the family's parked BMW to retrieve her 2-year-old daughter. Her husband had just arrived at the celebration, parking the car just a few moments earlier. It's unclear why Yulia's daughter remained in the car after her father had gone inside. When Yulia reached the car, she greeted her little girl with a big smile and open arms, encouraging her to climb into the front seat so that mom could grab her through the open front passenger side window, a decision that would ultimately decide Yulia's fate. As Yulia leaned in, her daughter, completely unaware, pressed a button on the inside door panel. The power window began to rise. Silently and in an instant, it trapped Yulia's neck between the pane of glass and the window frame, the pressure cutting off her airway. She didn't have time to react. The window pinned her, and without anyone nearby to witness what was happening, the seconds began to drag on. Seconds where oxygen stopped reaching her brain. Seconds that would sadly become minutes. Her body went limp. And when Yulia didn't return to the party with their daughter, Arthur started to wonder where they could be. He went outside, and that's where he discovered his wife. At first, there must have been confusion. Yulia was clearly there, halfway inside the car. But then panic set in as he got closer, because his wife wasn't responding. Arthur shattered the window to free his now unconscious wife, but by then, the damage was done. Yulia had been pinned, unable to breathe, for between 5 and 15 excruciating minutes. Paramedics were called. Yulia was rushed to the hospital where doctors worked to stabilize her. She had suffered severe brain trauma due to a prolonged lack of oxygen. For the next 8 days, her body fought. Machines kept her alive. Family and friends all prayed for a miracle. But Yulia never regained consciousness, and on September 7th, 2019, she passed away. There's something just so jarring about this kind of loss, because there's no villain, there's no high-speed crash, no overdose, no stranger with bad intentions. This was a moment, a split second really, an accident that could have happened to just about anyone. It was the innocence of a child's hand or foot brushing a button, a feature designed for convenience that would lead to a death. And that's what makes this story sit so heavily, because a lot of us can see ourselves in it. We've all leaned into a car to grab something that we may have forgotten. Maybe not a child, but certainly something. We've all had moments where we let our guard down because we were tired, because it was just another normal day, because we never imagined something so small could be so dangerous. After Yulia's death, there was a wave of grief, not just among those who knew her, but from people and parents all over the world who read about what happened. and saw a little bit of their own lives in the story. Hers was covered in international news, not for its sensationalism, but because of how painfully real it was. Yulia left behind 2 little girls, daughters who will grow up hearing stories about the kind of woman their mother was, the kind of love that she gave, those quiet, everyday things that she did for them. Her husband has largely stayed out of the public eye since, but it's hard to imagine the kind of guilt and heartbreak that he carries. The what ifs, all those moments replayed in his head. Stories like Yulia's aren't meant to shock, but it is the shock that makes them so memorable. Not just for how someone died, but for how they lived in the years, days, and even moments before tragedy strikes. A young mother, a woman who didn't do anything wrong, a woman who is just trying to celebrate her day like the rest of us would. Yulia Sharcombe should still be here, celebrating birthdays, watching her daughters grow, laughing with her husband. She had decades ahead of her, and they were taken in a moment that no one saw coming. We tell stories like this not to dwell on sadness, but to hold on to the people who are no longer here, to make sure their names are remembered and their lives are acknowledged. Yulia's story is heartbreaking because it's real, it's tragic, and it deserves to be told. In today's society, mental health is a topic of paramount importance. We recognize the signs, offer support, and strive to understand the complexities of the human mind. However, this wasn't always the case. In previous generations, mental health issues were often misunderstood, stigmatized, or ignored altogether. This particular lack of awareness and understanding sometimes led to tragic outcomes. One such story unfolded on January 14th, 1990, involving Daniel John O'Brien, a 31-year-old man from Roselle, Illinois. Daniel's story shows the consequences that can come when mental health struggles go unnoticed or unaddressed. Daniel John O'Brien was born on October 31st, 1959, in Illinois. He married his wife Kathleen Furlong on April 30th, 1982, in Bensenville, Illinois. Together, they had a son, Daniel Jr. Daniel was known to his friends and family as a kind and gentle person, hardworking, reliable, quiet. He provided for his family and was seen as both a devoted husband and father. In early January 1990, Daniel took a 2-week vacation to Trinidad and Tobago with his friend David Meyer. The trip was meant to be a relaxing break for both of them, an opportunity to unwind, soak up a little sun, and enjoy the island's natural beauty. They stayed at the Bel Air Hotel, situated just outside of Port of Spain, close to Piarco International Airport. For most of the vacation, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But in retrospect, David would recall that Daniel had seemed off in the days leading up to their final night on the island. Daniel had been unusually anxious and was reportedly trying to obtain medication for an undisclosed health issue. On the evening of January 14th, which happened to be their final night on vacation, Daniel went for a late evening swim in the hotel pool, while David stayed in the room to get some rest. At around 10 p.m., David was abruptly woken up from his sleep, feeling 2 hands wrapped around his neck. He woke up to see Daniel standing over him, trying to choke him. In a panic, David did everything he could to fend him off. They fought, trashing the hotel room. But before David could get a handle on the situation or call for help, Daniel grabbed a lamp and hit him over the head, knocking him unconscious. When David came to several minutes later, Daniel was now gone. What followed this interaction was a series of events that I don't think anyone could have scripted. When Daniel fled the room, he emerged into the hotel hallway, naked and clearly in distress. He found a 20-pound fire extinguisher and attempted to force it down his own throat, an act that, witnessed by other people, was deeply disturbing. Failing that, he exited the hotel grounds and made his way straight to the airport perimeter. Once there, he scaled 2 separate 10-foot fences, both topped with barbed wire, somehow pushing through both injury and adrenaline. He ended up on the tarmac, where airport security quickly spotted him. 4 guards tried to intervene, but that's when David went on the offensive. He fought all 4 security guards, reportedly with both intense aggression and seemingly superhuman strength. During this full-on brawl, Daniel managed to steal the security vehicle, a Jeep, and drove it at a high speed directly toward a British Airways Boeing 747 that was idling on the tarmac preparing for takeoff. He crashed the vehicle into the aircraft with such force that the top of the Jeep was nearly completely sheared off. Staggeringly, Daniel survived the crash. Witnesses say he emerged from the wreckage covered in blood and oil. That's when he ran toward the plane again, and in a final, devastating act, he climbed into one of the jet's running engines, the result of which was instant and horrifying. Daniel was viciously sucked into the turbine, and there was no hope for survival. Authorities on the scene were stunned. Airport Authority Chief Winston Sweet labeled the death as an apparent suicide. No one could immediately explain Daniel's behavior. What had led this seemingly ordinary man, a father, a husband, a man on vacation with a friend, to do something so violent, so inexplicable? In the days that followed, Daniel's family would speak to officials, and some pieces began to come together. As stated earlier, Daniel had been suffering from some kind of health issue, possibly related to his mental wellness, and he had been trying, unsuccessfully, to get access to medication while on the island. No one knows exactly what kind of medication he was seeking or whether it was for a diagnosed condition. And while it's possible he was suffering from an untreated or undiagnosed mental health issue, we're left to wonder. What is known is that Daniel's behavior in those final hours was completely at odds with the man his family and friends knew. His actions were erratic, self-destructive, and ultimately fatal. The attack on his friend, the physical escalation, the crash into the plane, these are all things that clearly point to someone in crisis. Today, we are far more equipped to discuss, understand, and treat mental health than we were in 1990. But stories like Daniel John O'Brien's still highlight just how far we have to go, not just in terms of treatment, but in early recognition and support. What Daniel was going through remains unclear, but it's reasonable to assume that something inside of him broke in a terrifying way. His death leaves far more questions than answers. Clearly, something wasn't right, and the explosion of violence and self-destruction that ended his life goes to show that silent weight that some people carry. We may never fully understand what led Daniel to act as he did. And the truth is, you never really know what someone else is struggling with until it's potentially too late. And sometimes, heartbreakingly, it ends like this. Holiday parades are one of the few things in life that still feel truly wholesome. They're nostalgic, simple, and meant for everyone. Kids waving flags, parents snapping pictures, music in the air, and the sense of togetherness that doesn't ask for much more than just showing up. No one ever goes to a parade thinking they're walking into a tragedy. But when the unthinkable does happen in a moment like that, when something meant to bring joy becomes the backdrop for something far darker, it hits that much harder. On May 26, 2025, the city of Greene, Ohio, like countless other communities across the United States, gathered to honor fallen military personnel for Memorial Day. It's a time for reflection and gratitude, commemorating those who died while serving in the U.S. Armed Forces. In towns across America, parades are held not just to remember those who served, but to bring communities together in a shared spirit of appreciation as well as patriotism. In green, that parade is a beloved tradition. Families line the sidewalks, children wave assorted flags, and local organizations and businesses ride through the streets in decorated vehicles. It's meant to be a lighthearted, wholesome day. For 13-year-old Matthew Schultz, it was just that. A chance to be a part of something fun, to wave at neighbors, friends, and family, and to ride along in the Memorial Day parade with his friends from Air Ninja Gym. Matthew was a student at Green Middle School. He was known for his energy, kindness, and zest for life. He loved Star Wars and fruit snacks, and like many kids his age, he had an adventurous streak, which made him a perfect fit for Air Ninja Gym, a local fitness center that trains kids in obstacle-based activities inspired by the TV show American Ninja Warrior. Matthew is outgoing, athletic, and deeply loved by his friends and family. On Memorial Day Monday, Matthew joined other kids on the Air Ninja Gym float, a decorated flatbed trailer hitched to a pickup truck. In addition to the decorations, the trailer had fencing around the edges and was designed to be a safe space for the kids to wave to parade goers. Matthew, full of excitement, was doing just that, smiling, waving, soaking in the moment. But what happened next is a thing straight from nightmares. At some point during the ride, Matthew either lost his balance or stepped too close to the edge of the trailer. Witnesses say he fell from it, and after he hit the pavement, he was struck by the rear wheels of it. The distance from the edge of the trailer to the pavement wasn't great, but the trailer itself was a multi-ton piece of machinery. The rear tires rolled over him before anyone had a chance to react. Parade goers and volunteers nearby rushed to his aid. Emergency services were called immediately, and Matthew was quickly transported to the Akron Children's Hospital. But despite the best efforts of first responders and medical staff, Matthew was pronounced dead minutes after his arrival. What had been a celebratory day turned in the blink of an eye into a day of grief and disbelief. Hundreds of people witnessed the accident unfold, and those that didn't see it themselves learned about it later. There was likely no one in the community left untouched by the weight of what happened to Matthew. In the immediate aftermath, the Green School District released a statement offering condolences and announcing that grief counselors would be made available to all students and faculty. Vigils were organized. A GoFundMe for post-life expenses was set up. On social media, messages of heartbreak and support for the Schultz family poured in. The gym community that Matthew was a part of, devastated and grieving, also issued statements asking for privacy as they mourned one of their own. As of the release day of this video, the investigation into the incident is still ongoing. It's unclear what safety measures were in place or what specifically went wrong. But regardless of what is learned from the investigation, there's no bringing Matthew back. What happened in a split second just can't be undone. What's undoubtedly the hardest thing to process is the sheer innocence of this all. A young boy full of life, waving to the crowd from a trailer in a parade. There's no way that his friends and family could have known that that would be the last time they'd see Matthew smiling. That wave would be the final one. It's too soon for anyone to make sense of this. Too soon for those affected to fully grieve. Too soon for really any answers. Right now, there's only space for mourning. A collective heartbreak for a life that ended in the most unimaginable way possible. Matthew Schultz was just 13 years old, and now a family is without their son. A school has lost one of its students, and a community is left with an emptiness where there was once celebration. There's no roadmap for how to process a loss like this. No guide on how a community should react when something so innocent turns so tragic. And maybe there's no making sense of it at all. What happened to Matthew wasn't just heartbreaking. It's likely something that feels unfair in 1,000 different ways. Sometimes the most joyful moments can be filled with unpredictability. That's proof that life, even at its brightest, can shift without any warning at all. Most people go to work with one goal in mind: to provide for themselves and the people they care about. The daily grind for many is about paying bills, keeping food on the table, and maybe building something they can be proud of. And while the work itself might not be glamorous, there's a comfort in the routine. Clocking in, putting in your time, clocking out, and heading home for the night. But what happens when that cycle is interrupted not by choice, but by tragedy? What happens when work becomes the very thing that prevents someone from ever going home again? On January 8th, 2025, a 41-year-old mechanic named Luis Fernando Guerrero Platenchi walked into his job at Alco Iron and Metal in San Leandro, California, like he had done countless times before. A husband, a father, and a longtime resident of neighboring Castro Valley, Luis had spent years in the trade. He was experienced, reliable, and took pride in what he did. To both his family and co-workers, he was much more than just a mechanic. He was a good man doing his best to make a life for the people that he loved. Luis had worked with heavy machinery for years. His daily responsibilities at Alco Iron and Metal involved maintaining and repairing large equipment. Machines that most people will only ever see, not so much as touch. Forklifts, conveyor belts, shredders, balers. It was a tough job, the kind that demanded both skill and attention to detail. Alco Iron and Metal is a family-run scrap metal recycling business with multiple facilities across California. The San Leandro location is by far their busiest, often dealing with thousands of pounds of scrap metal at a time. For Luis, this was familiar terrain. On that particular Tuesday, Luis was working to fix a broken forklift, a common sight in a yard full of aging machinery. Forklifts are the workhorses in industrial settings, used to move everything from heavy scrap to bundled wire. When they break down, it's someone like Luis who steps in to diagnose the issue and get them running again. But something went terribly wrong that day. While Luis was positioning himself to work on the piece of equipment, its fork portion that was in an elevated position suddenly collapsed right on top of Luis. Details of what caused the failure are still under investigation, but what is known is that the machinery came down with enough force to pin him beneath it. It was immediate, violent, and catastrophic. His coworkers rushed to his aid, but by the time emergency services arrived, Luis had already succumbed to his injuries, and there was no bringing him back. This is a heartbreaking situation all on its own, but what makes it even worse is that this was not an isolated incident at Alco Iron and Metal. In fact, Luis was the third worker in 8 years to lose his life while working for the company. In 2017, a worker was killed when a screw conveyor collapsed on him. In 2022, another employee died when a 4,000-pound wire bundle fell on him. Each of these deaths prompted investigations from Cal-OSHA, the California Division of Occupational Safety and Health. For context, OSHA is a federal agency tasked with the job of ensuring safe and healthy working conditions by enforcing standards and providing workplace safety training. Cal-OSHA serves the same function at the state level in California. When workers are killed or seriously injured on the job, OSHA steps in to determine whether safety regulations were followed and to hold companies accountable when they aren't. In Alco's case, OSHA had already issued more than 60 citations to the company over the years, including at least 12 violations classified as serious and 6 labeled as willful. In layman's terms, serious means there's a substantial probability that death or serious physical harm could result from a hazard the employer knew or should have known about. Willful means the employer knowingly failed to comply with a legal requirement or acted with plain indifference to employee safety. And yet, despite this history, despite repeated fatalities and a track record of safety violations, Alco Iron and Metal remained operational. For those of you wondering how that could be, it's because OSHA, even when it finds major safety infractions, doesn't have the authority to unilaterally shut a company down. The process of halting a business's operations is a long legal journey that involves the courts. By the time enforcement catches up, it's often too late. Following Luis's death, the public response was immediate and furious. Local Assemblywoman Liz Ortega condemned the tragedy and demanded an audit of what Cal OSHA has the ability to do when it comes to remanding companies that have shown to be bad actors in the space. In her words, "We cannot allow this pattern of preventable deaths to continue." Ortega's office pushed for a deeper investigation not just into Alco, but into how safety violations are tracked, penalized, and whether businesses with repeat offenses are allowed to continue putting workers at risk. She wasn't alone in this fight. Workers' rights groups and labor advocates also raised concerns about how companies like Alco manage safety, especially for non-English speaking workers who often receive inadequate training and are more vulnerable to workplace hazards. Alco Iron and Metal, for its part, expressed condolences over Luis's death. In a public statement, they said they were devastated by the incident and insisted that they had a robust safety training program in place. They also claimed to be cooperating fully with investigators and pledged to do whatever it took to prevent future tragedies. But for many, those words rang hollow. Former employees came forward and described a very different reality. Some said safety protocols were outdated or poorly enforced. Others described language barriers that left them unsure about safety procedures or emergency protocols. Several claimed that the company prioritized productivity over their protection. And while investigations continue, none of it changes the fact that Luis Guerrero Tlatenchi lost his life that day. He went to work as he had many others. He likely didn't think twice about whether the equipment he was working on would fail. Luis left behind a grieving family. The details of his personal life haven't all been made public, but what is known paints a picture of a hard-working, devoted man who wanted nothing more than to support his loved ones. His death wasn't just a statistic on a workplace safety report. It was a real, painful loss for those who knew him. A father, a husband, a friend. There are few things more senseless than a preventable death. When someone dies in the line of duty, in a war zone or a rescue mission, there's at least some acknowledgement of the risks involved. But when someone dies simply by doing their job, that's something else entirely. That is a failure. Luis's story shouldn't just fade into the background. The hope is that it brings on real conversations about what accountability looks like in industries that rely on heavy machinery and manual labor. It should shine a light on how companies respond after tragedies, and whether their words actually match their actions. At the end of the day, Luis Guerrero Tlatenchi deserved better. He deserved a workplace that put his safety first. He deserved to go home to his family. And now, they're left to navigate life without him. A life that should have never been cut short while on the job.